The Grand Hall of the High Synod was not merely a room. It was a testament to the enduring perfection of the Galactic Concordat, a sprawling cavern of crystalline acoustic geometry designed to amplify the truth and silence the discordant notes of chaos. Here, the air hummed with the scent of ozone and crushed lavender, a carefully curated atmosphere meant to soothe the physiologies of a dozen distinct species. Yet today, the air tasted of copper and old fear. High Counselor Valen of the Ethelgard rested his slender, translucent hands upon the podium of weeping glass, his multifaceted eyes twitching with a rare sign of biological stress as he gazed out at the gathered representatives. The hall was suspended within the upper atmosphere of the gas-giant throne world, and through the transparent floor, the swirling storms of the planet below offered a hypnotic, violent counterpoint to the rigid order of the chamber. Usually the Synod was a place of slow deliberation, where treaties took cycles to draft and trade agreements were sung in harmonies that lasted for days. But silence, heavy and suffocating, had fallen over the assembly, broken only by the nervous shifting of the crustacean-like Creel delegates and the low, subsonic rumbling of the tectonic Vorn. They were not here to discuss trade routes or stellar mapping. They were here to discuss the abomination. Valen cleared his throat, a sound like chiming glass, and the amplification crystals carried the noise to the furthest reaches of the hall. He gestured to the center of the room, where a three-dimensional holographic projection flickered into life, casting long, jagged shadows against the pristine white walls of the chamber. The image was grainy, reconstructed from long-range sensor ghosts and fractured telemetry recovered from a border patrol drone that had barely escaped with its logic core intact. And what it showed was an affront to every aesthetic and engineering principle held dear by the Concordat. It was a vessel, if such a word could even apply to the monstrosity floating in the void, a chaotic amalgamation of rusted hull plates, exposed conduits, jagged antennae, and asymmetrical thruster banks that seemed to vomit radiation rather than emit it. It possessed no sleek curves, no harmonic resonance drives, no bioluminescent hull markings. It was a scar against the backdrop of the stars, a floating mountain of refuse that burned with a dirty, orange light. To the Ethelgard, who grew their ships from singing crystals, and the Vorn, who carved theirs from living asteroids, this object was not a machine. It was a corpse, a necromantic horror of metal and fire that defied the laws of elegant physics. "It has been confirmed," Valen spoke, his voice trembling with a mixture of disgust and terror. "The anomaly located in the outer rims near the perilous expanse is not a natural formation. It is constructed. It is propelled." A ripple of unease moved through the crowd, a collective shudder of politicians and warlords who had never seen anything that did not conform to the golden ratio of galactic design. "The probe we sent was overwhelmed not by weapons fire, but by the sheer magnitude of the interference this object generates. Its engines bleed hard radiation. Its hull creates gravimetric distortions simply by existing. It is vast, undeniably massive, yet it moves with a sluggish, grinding persistence that suggests it is hunting." The holographic image rotated, revealing a flank of the ship where massive, jagged clamps and serrated drills were welded directly onto the outer skin, looking for all the world like the mandibles of a starving insect. "We have named it the Discordant. It matches no known configuration in the archives. It answers no hails. It simply moves through the drift, consuming debris, seemingly indifferent to the navigational hazards of the asteroid fields it plows through. Fellow counselors, we face an entity that embodies entropy itself." Sub-Admiral Kruk of the Khazra stood up, his obsidian armor clanking against his carapace, the sound sharp and aggressive in the delicate hall. The Khazra were warriors obsessed with honor and clean kills, and his mandibles clicked in irritation. "You speak of it as a ghost, Valen," Kruk growled, his voice a deep bass that vibrated in the chests of the smaller delegates. "But metal is metal. If it bleeds radiation, it can be killed. You call it a horror because it is ugly. I call it a target. Our fleets are massing at the quadrant edge. If this heap of scrap enters Concordat space, we will shatter it. It looks fragile. Look at it, welded seams, exposed piping. One volley of plasma torpedoes will rupture its containment and scatter it back into the junk it resembles. Why have you summoned us for a council of war against a garbage scow?" Kruk's arrogance was a tangible force, a shield he used to deflect the creeping dread that the image instilled in him, for even he, a master of void warfare, could not understand the purpose of the jagged spikes and massive, seemingly useless spinning drums attached to the vessel's spine. Valen narrowed his eyes, tapping a command into the podium. The hologram zoomed in, focusing on a section of the junk ship where a sensor reading was overlaid in crimson text. "Do not be a fool, Kruk. Look at the density readings. That scrap is not standard alloy. It is comprised of ultra-dense composite plating layered in ways that defy logic. And the energy output. Observe the reactor signature." The gathered delegates gasped as the numbers scrolled past. The energy output of the vessel was not merely high, it was impossible. It rivaled the output of a small star, contained within a shell that looked like it was held together by prayers and oxidization. "It is not fragile. It is a fortress disguised as a ruin, and it is heading directly for the Typhon Rift." The mention of the Typhon Rift silenced even Kruk. The rift was a tear in the fabric of spacetime, a volatile region of subspace instability that had swallowed entire fleets in the past. No Concordat ship could survive its tidal forces. "If this thing can navigate the rift," Valen whispered, "then it possesses a mastery of gravitation we cannot comprehend. We are not dealing with scavengers. We are dealing with something ancient or something entirely new and terribly wrong." The debate raged for hours, a cyclic storm of fear and posturing. The scientific cast argued that the ship must be an automated relic of a dead civilization, a berserker unit gone to seed, accumulating mass to repair itself. The religious cast claimed it was a manifestation of the void gods, a punishment for their hubris. But underneath the arguments, the unifying emotion was a primal revulsion. The Concordat was built on the philosophy of harmony. That technology should mimic nature, that efficiency was beautiful, that civilization was clean. This ship was the antithesis of their existence. It was industrial, brutal, and unapologetically functional in a way that seemed cruel. It was a galactic horror, not because it had fired a shot, but because its very existence suggested that the universe was not a place of order, but a chaotic, grinding factory where survival required not elegance but brute, ugly force. As the arguments reached a crescendo, a priority alert chime cut through the noise, high and piercing. Valen froze, looking at his datapad. The color drained from his face, turning his translucent skin a pale, milky white. "It is here," he breathed. "The object has exited the rift. It is in the Typhon system, and it is hailing us." The transition from the debate chamber to the tactical command center was a blur of motion, the serene atmosphere of the synod shattered by the urgency of the crisis. The main view screen of the station, a massive wall of coherent light, displayed the Typhon system in real time. The rift was a swirling vortex of violet and black, a bruising of reality that usually remained dormant, but now it churned with violent energy. And emerging from that maelstrom, pushing through the graviton shear that would have torn a crystalline cruiser into dust, was the Discordant. On the high-resolution screens, it was even more terrifying. It was colossal, eclipsing the local moons, a sprawling city of dark metal. Gigantic thrusters flared with dirty ionic fire, correcting its drift with shuddering convulsions. Clouds of steam and vented gas surrounded it like a shroud. It did not glide, it clawed its way through the vacuum. The sheer scale of it rendered the Concordat defense fleet sleek, teardrop-shaped vessels of silver and white, into insignificant specks. The junk was revealed to be layers of ablative armor, scarred by centuries of impacts, patched and repatched until the ship was a geological record of survival. "Put it on screen," Valen ordered, his voice thin. "Audio only or visual?" The communications officer, a young Creel whose chitin was trembling, replied, "Visual, High Counselor. The transmission is analog, extremely high bandwidth but primitive encoding. We are converting it now." The screen flickered, static washing over the image of the stars, accompanied by a harsh, grinding noise that made the delegates wince. Then the image stabilized. They expected a monster. They expected a swirling vortex of energy, or a biological hive-mind leader, or a cold, robotic interface. What they saw was a room. It was a cramped, utilitarian bridge dimly lit by the glow of physical screens and buttons. Cables hung from the ceiling. There was a faint haze of smoke, and sitting in the center chair, looking exhausted, was a bipedal creature with soft, pale skin, wearing a stained flight suit made of synthetic fiber. The creature held a ceramic mug in one hand and was rubbing its eyes with the other. It looked mundane, it looked soft. "This is Captain Elias Thorne of the Terran Heavy Engineering Vessel Scavengers." "Hope," the creature spoke. The universal translator struggled for a moment with the dialect, parsing the harsh consonants before smoothing them into the melodic trade tongue of the Concordat. "We are receiving your warnings. We apologize for the unauthorized entry into your space. Our navigation array took a hit 3 sectors back, and we've been drifting through the sublayer to bypass the radiation storms. We didn't mean to scare anyone." The voice was gravelly, tired, and utterly devoid of the menace they had projected onto the ship. Valen stared, his mind reeling. This was the horror, this soft, fleshy being in a room full of wires. "Captain Thorne," Valen began, trying to regain his composure. "You are piloting a vessel of unauthorized configuration within the sacred borders of the Concordat. Your ship. It is an abomination of emissions and hazardous construction. Identify your species and your intent immediately." "Are you in active war?" On the screen, Captain Thorne blinked, then took a slow sip from his mug. He looked at someone off-screen. "Hey, Mikos, the shiny elf thinks we're in active war." A muffled voice laughed in the background. Thorne turned back to the camera, his expression shifting from fatigue to a mild, patient amusement. "No war, counselor. We're humans. Earth. Look, we know the ship isn't pretty. She's built for deep-crust mining and high-gravity salvage. She runs hot," she rattles, "and she leaks a little bit of theta-ben radiation, but she holds together. We aren't here to fight. We're actually looking for a place to cool down our reactor core before it goes critical. If you could point us toward a gas giant with a high helium-3 content, we'll be out of your hair in 2 rotations." The casual nature of the request stunned the Synod. This galactic horror was asking for a pit stop. Kruk, the warlord, stepped forward, his pride stung by the dismissal. "You insult us, creature. You bring this floating landfill into our system, disrupting our sensors, violating the sanctity of the void, and you ask for fuel? You are a threat to the stability of this sector. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded and purged." Thorne's expression hardened. The amusement vanished, replaced by a cold, flat look that suddenly made the soft human seem much more dangerous. He leaned forward, setting the mug down with a heavy thud. "Listen, buddy, I've got 40,000 colonists in cryosleep in the hold, a reactor that's currently processing more energy than your entire fleet combined, and a hull that's taken hits from asteroid impacts that would crack your little glass toys in half. I'm not powering down. If I power down, the magnetic containment fails and this whole system turns into a supernova. I'm not asking for permission to survive. I'm telling you that I'm parking in orbit of that gas giant to stabilize. If you fire on us, you won't scratch the paint, but you might annoy my chief engineer, and you really don't want to do that." The transmission cut with a sharp click. The screen went black. Silence returned to the command center, but this time it was the silence of confusion. The junk ship was a colony vessel. It carried thousands of lives. The cognitive dissonance was painful. To the Concordat, life was precious and required beauty to sustain it. Putting lives inside that rusted hulk was madness. Before the Council could decide on a course of action, whether to attack or retreat, the universe made the decision for them. The Typhon rift, which had been churning in the background, suddenly expanded. A shockwave of dimensional distortion rippled out, faster than light, slamming into the system. The sensors screamed as the fabric of space began to tear. This was not a standard fluctuation, it was a cascade event. The delicate, harmonic shields of the Concordat fleet flared and shattered instantly, unable to adapt to the chaotic frequencies of the rift. The beautiful ships of the Ethelgard began to fracture, their crystal hulls singing a death knell as they cracked under the gravitational shear. The Khazra cruisers, built for deflection, found their armor buckling as space itself twisted. Panic erupted in the command center. "The rift is collapsing," the science officer screamed. "It's a localized vacuum decay. Everything within 2 astronomical units is going to be spaghettified." Valen gripped the podium, watching his fleet, the pride of the Concordat, tumbling like leaves in a hurricane. They were powerless. Their technology, built on the principles of perfect order, could not handle the raw, chaotic violence of the universe breaking down. They were going to die. And in the middle of the apocalypse, the scavenger's hope began to move, but it did not run. The massive, ugly ship turned its prow toward the expanding rift. "What are they doing?" Kruk bellowed, watching the tactical display. "They are flying into the event horizon. Are they mad?" The human ship accelerated its engine. Ease belching thick plumes of plasma that looked like dirty smoke but provided immense thrust. The junk on the hull, the spikes, the drums, the latticework of girders began to deploy. The massive jagged clamps opened wide. A new transmission broke through the static, audio only this time. It was Thorne's voice, but it was clipped, professional, and shouting orders. "All hands brace for gravity shear. Engineering, reroute all auxiliary power to the structural integrity field. Deploy the grav anchors. We're going to stitch this shut." On the main screen, the impossible happened. The scavenger's hope rammed into the edge of the dimensional tier. It did not break. The rusted, ugly metal groaned. The sound transmitted through the sensor telemetry as a low-frequency roar, but it held. The useless spikes fired, launching miles-long cables made of hyperdense, fluctuating alloy deep into the rift. The spinning drums on the spine revved up, generating a countergravimetric pulse that was so crude and violent it shook the teeth of the observers on the station, but it acted as a wedge. The humans were not using elegant science to close the rift. They were using brute force engineering. They were essentially stapling the universe back together. They are grappling the anomaly, Valen whispered, unable to comprehend the physics. Their ship is acting as a physical bridge between the two fracturing planes of reality. The human ship shuddered violently, explosions blooming along its hull as stress fractures vented atmosphere and debris. To the Concordat, it looked like the ship was dying. To the humans, it was Tuesday. The Scavenger's hope was designed for this, not for war, but for the war against nature. It was a ship built by a species that had evolved on a death world, a species that understood that the universe was hostile and that survival meant being tougher than the rocks you were digging through. The horror of their design was simply the aesthetic of resilience. For 3 hours, the Synod watched in stunned silence as the human ship battled the laws of physics. They saw small shuttlecraft, looking like flying bricks, launch from the main hangar, weaving through the gravity storm to weld supports onto the failing sections of the main ship. They saw the humans detonate controlled nuclear charges against their own hull to create blast waves that counteracted the rift's expansion. It was a display of madness and genius. Slowly, agonizingly, the violet tear in space began to shrink. The Scavenger's hope was pulling the edges of the wound closed, using its own mass as the needle and its gravity anchors as the thread. With a final blinding flash of energy that overloaded the station's sensors, the rift snapped shut, leaving behind only a residual gravitational bruise. The Scavenger's hope floated in the calm, venting steam, half its lights out, drifting sideways. It looked like a wreck. It looked like a corpse. "Status," Kruk barked, his voice filled with a begrudging awe. "Is the enemy vessel destroyed?" "Negative," the sensor officer replied, their voice filled with disbelief. "Life support is holding. Reactor is stable at 40%. They are commencing repairs. They are hailing us again." The screen flickered back to life. Captain Thorne looked worse for wear. There was a cut on his forehead and soot on his face, but he was smiling. He lifted his mug, which was miraculously still intact. "All right, neighbors, the leak is fixed. We lost our port thruster bank and we're going to need some raw ore to patch the hull, but the neighborhood is safe. Now about that refueling permit." Act 2 began not with a battle, but with an invitation. The Concordat, humbled and terrified, granted the humans permission to orbit the gas giant. But Valen, driven by a desperate need to understand, requested a diplomatic summit aboard the Scavenger's Hope. He had to see the inside of the beast. He had to understand the mind that could build a horror and use it to save a world. He was accompanied by Kruk and a delegation of the finest scientists the Concordat had to offer. As their shuttle approached the human vessel, the scale of it became overwhelming. The hull was a patchwork quilt of history, plates from different eras, scorch marks from different stars. It was ugly, yes, but up close, Valen saw something else. He saw intent. Every weld was precise. Every exposed pipe was armored. The chaos was only skin deep. Beneath it lay a skeleton of indestructible logic. They docked in a massive, cavernous hangar that smelled of ozone, machine oil, and synthesized coffee. There were no ceremonial guards, no anthems. Instead, the hangar was filled with activity. Immense robotic loaders moved crates. Humans in exosuits were welding plating. Sparks rained down like golden snow. The humans themselves were a shock. They came in all shapes and sizes, shouting over the noise, laughing, cursing. They lacked the telepathic unity of T. Heethelgard or the rigid discipline of the Khazra. They were chaotic, loud, and vibrant. Captain Thorne met them on the deck, flanked by his chief engineer, a woman named O'Malley who had cybernetic replacements for both arms and was wiping grease from her face with a rag. "Welcome aboard the Hope," Thorne said, extending a hand. Valen hesitated, then took it. The human's grip was warm and firm. "Sorry about the mess. We're still securing the lower decks from the stress test." "Stress test?" Valen asked, looking around at the industrial cathedral. "You call grappling a dimensional rift a stress test?" "Standard procedure for Class 4 anomalies," O'Malley chimed in, her voice metallic. She creaked a bit, but the rivets held. "You guys build your ships like jewelry. Pretty, but if you hit a pothole, you shatter. We build ships like boots. You step in the mud, you wipe it off, you keep walking." The tour of the ship was a dismantling of the Concordat's worldview. They walked through the hydroponics bays, where the humans grew their own food in vertical farms that recycled every drop of water. They saw the engineering deck, where the abomination reactor pulsed with the power of a contained star, managed not by prayer or song, but by mathematics and sweat. They visited the habitation ring, expecting cells for the colonists, but found parks, schools, and living spaces that were cramped but filled with art, music, and family. The galactic horror was a city. It was a lifeboat, and as Valen spoke with the humans, he realized the source of their ugliness. "We don't have the luxury of aesthetics," Thorne explained as they sat in the mess hall eating synthesized protein that tasted remarkably like seasoned fowl. "Humanity. We lost our home a long time ago. We didn't leave Earth because we wanted to explore. We left because we had to. We've been running for generations. Everything you see on this ship, the armor, the modularity, the recycling systems, it's all because we can't afford to waste a single atom. We don't build to look good. We build to last. To you, a ship is a projection of your soul. To us, a ship is the only thing standing between us and the cold." Valen felt a profound shift in his perception. The junk was not refuse, it was memory. Every scar on the hull was a story of survival. The humans were not monsters, they were the ultimate pragmatists. They had sacrificed beauty for endurance, and in doing so, they had become something stronger than the Concordat. They were the rock in the stream. But the revelation of the human's nature was only the precursor to the darker truth. As the delegation prepared to leave, Kruk, who had been strangely silent, inspecting the weapons arrays, turned to Thorne. "You run," Kruk said, his voice low. "You said you have been running from what? A predator? A plague?" Thorne's face went still. The bustling noise of the mess hall seemed to fade. He exchanged a look with O'Malley. "Come with me," Thorne said softly. "There's something you need to see. The real reason we built the ship this way. The real reason we have gravity anchors and hull plating 3 meters thick." They were led to the stellar cartography room, a dark chamber dominated by a holographic map of the galaxy. But this map was different from the Concordats. Large sections of the outer rim were marked in red. "We call them the Silence," Thorne said, gesturing to the red zones. "We don't know what they are, biological, mechanical, energy-based. We've never seen them clearly. All we know is that they eat civilizations. They don't conquer, they consume. They feed on high-energy signals, coherent light, harmonic transmissions, unshielded subspace traffic. The more advanced and loud a civilization is, the faster they come." Valen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "The harmonic flow," he whispered. "Our communications, our crystal drives, we sing to the stars." "Exactly," Thorne said grimly. "You're ringing a dinner bell. We survive because we learn to be quiet. We use analog tech because it doesn't bleed into subspace. We build ugly, shielded ships because they dampen our signature. We look like junk because the Silence ignores junk. They're looking for the shiny stuff. They're looking for you." The revelation hit the Synod delegation like a physical blow. The galactic horror was not the monster. It was the camouflage. The humans had turned themselves into scavengers to hide from the apex predator. And the Concordat, in their arrogance and obsession with beauty, had been illuminating themselves in the dark forest, inviting their own destruction. "The anomaly, the rift," Valen stammered, "was that." "A scout," Thorne confirmed. "The rift wasn't natural, it was a breached tunnel, something was trying to push through. When we stitched it shut, we bought you time. But they know where you are now. The Scavenger's hope isn't just a colony ship, it's a shield. We came Air because we detected your signal density. We came to warn you, but we arrived a little late." Act 3 opened with the realization of the true scale of the threat. The peace that followed the closing of the rift was the quiet before the storm. The Concordat was in chaos. The truth brought by the humans shattered their society. The Ethelgard stopped singing. The cities went dark. Fear, raw and unfiltered, took hold. But in that fear, the alliance was forged. The humans did not leave. They could have used the confusion to refuel and flee, disappearing back into the drift, but they stayed. Thorne and his engineers began to work with the Concordat scientists. The clash of cultures was violent but productive. The humans taught the aliens how to ugly up their technology. They taught them how to shield their reactors with lead and stone, how to switch to analog comms, how to build physical armor over their delicate force fields. It was a painful process. To the Ethelgard, covering their crystal spires with blast plating was like painting over a masterpiece with tar. But Valen, now the strongest advocate for the humans, led the charge. "Better to be ugly and alive," he told the council, "than beautiful and dead." And then the Silence arrived. It did not come with a bang, but with a sudden, overwhelming darkness. The stars at the edge of the system simply went out. A massive shadow, vast and formless, began to move through the outer planets. It was not a ship. It was a cloud of nanotechnological swarms, billions of miles wide, stripping matter from everything it touched. It sought the energy signatures of the cities, the hum of the grid. The Concordat fleet, now modified with human tech, launched to meet it. But they were still too fragile. The swarm began to devour the lead ships, stripping away the armor to get to the sweet energy candy inside. "They're breaking through the perimeter," Kruk roared from the bridge of his flagship, which was now welded with human-made girders. "We cannot stop them. There are too many." On the bridge of the Scavenger's Hope, Thorn watched the tactical map. The swarm was bypassing the fleet, heading straight for the inhabited worlds. "They're hungry," Thorn muttered. "They want the main course." He looked at O'Malley. "Is the payload ready?" O'Malley nodded, her face grim. "It's ready, but Elias, if we do this, we strip the core. We'll be dead in the water. We won't be able to run." Thorn looked at the screen, at the terrified alien fleets, at the beautiful, fragile worlds behind them. He thought of the 40,000 people in cryo below decks. He thought of the generations of running. "We're done running," Thorn said. "Drop the disguise, light her up." The order went out. For the first time in centuries, the humans stopped hiding. The Scavenger's Hope dropped its dampening fields. It retracted the lead shielding around its reactor. And then it pushed the core to 300% output. To the sensors of the Silence, the junk ship suddenly transformed. It ceased to be a pile of refuse and became a blinding beacon, a star born in the vacuum. It shone with more energy, more noise, and more power than the entire Concordat system combined. It was the ultimate lure. The swarm turned. Like a predator distracted by a flare, the massive cloud of darkness shifted its trajectory away from the planets, away from the fleet, and converged on the single burning point of light that was the human ship. "They are drawing them in," Valen gasped from his command bunker. "They are sacrificing themselves." "Not yet they aren't," Kruk growled. "Look." The Scavenger's Hope waited until the swarm was enveloping it, until the nanites were eating into the outer hull, stripping away the rust and the history. And then the humans played their ace. They didn't fire a weapon. They activated the grav anchors, not outward but inward. "Gravity well generated," O'Malley screamed over the alarms. "Singularity forming in 3-2-1. The ship didn't implode. It created a localized event horizon around itself, a bubble of time and space that was infinitely dense. The swarm, caught in the gravity well, was sucked in, crushed against the invincible shielding of the event horizon. The humans had turned their ship into a captive black hole. The battle lasted for hours, a stalemate between the devouring swarm and the immovable object. The Scavenger's Hope groaned, its frame twisting, but the junk held. The deep-crust mining struts, the salvage clamps, the over-engineered bulkheads, they took the pressure that would have vaporized a lesser ship. Finally, the swarm, sensing that the energy source was unreachable and that its own mass was being consumed by the gravity well, began to dissipate. It broke apart, retreating back into the dark between the stars, searching for easier prey. The gravity field collapsed. The Scavenger's Hope floated in the silence. It was a wreck. The outer hull was gone, stripped down T. Oh, the skeletal frame. Fires raged on every deck, but the core still pulsed. The signal was weak, but it was there. "This is Captain Thorn," the voice whispered over the comms, sounding faint, broken. We're still here, but we could use a tow." The relief that washed over the system was physical. The galactic horror had saved them all. In the aftermath, the galaxy was changed. The Concordat was dissolved, replaced by the Terran System Alliance. The aesthetic of the galaxy shifted. Ships were no longer just beautiful, they were armored. Cities were shielded. The harmony was replaced by endurance. Scavenger's Hope was not scrapped. It was towed into orbit above the Synod world and became a station, a monument. The aliens looked at it now not with revulsion, but with reverence. They saw the rusted plates and the exposed pipes, and they saw the scars of a guardian. They finally understood the human philosophy that had terrified them, that beauty is not in the shape of the object, but in what it can survive. The humans, the scavengers, the people of the junk ship, had taught the galaxy a new truth. The universe is dark and full of horrors. But if you are tough enough, if you are stubborn enough, and if you are willing to get your hands dirty, you can build a light that nothing can put out. And sometimes, the scariest thing in the dark is the monster that is on your side. Thorn stood on the observation deck of the repaired station, looking out at the rebuilding fleet. Valen stood beside him. The alien looked different now. He wore a heavy coat over his robes, a human affectation. "It is ugly," Valen said, pointing to a new cruiser that combined Ethelgard crystal with human blast steel. Thorn sipped his coffee. Yeah, it's hideous. It is perfect, Valen corrected. Thorn smiled. Welcome to the mud, counselor, try not to slip. The two unlikely allies watched the stars, no longer afraid of the silence, for they knew that in the junkyard of the galaxy, the scrap metal bites back.